My name is Quinn. I'm 34 years old. I live with my husband and our two children in a quiet suburb of Oregon. My life isn't perfect, but it's peaceful. I wake up early to make breakfast, send my kids off to school, and hug my husband every night before bed. I used to believe the past was behind me, until one day, I received an envelope from the court. My hands trembled as I opened it. A summons. The petitioner, my mother, and Caleb, the man who shattered my childhood. I thought I had read it wrong, but no. They were demanding custody of my daughter. And at the very first hearing, Caleb stepped out, straightened his collar, looked me directly in the eye, and said, "Emma is not Quinn's daughter. I have proof." The whole courtroom fell silent, as if the air had been sucked out. My heart stopped. My husband gripped my hand under the table, while I sat frozen, unable to speak. Have you ever been betrayed by your own family, siding with the one who destroyed you? What would you do if one day an enemy disguised as a real father claimed the right to take away the child you carried and raised? If this story touches you, leave a comment. Hit like so I know you're listening. Don't forget to subscribe so we can go to the very end of this truth together, because what came after was even more brutal. I sat motionless in my car for hours after that first hearing, staring at the steering wheel, my knuckles white from how hard I'd been gripping it. Caleb's voice kept echoing in my head like a never-ending nightmare. Emma is not Quinn's daughter. Clear, cold, each word slicing through the memories I'd spent my youth stitching back together. I once thought I had survived, that time would blur the old memories, that the wounds would eventually heal. But standing before him in that courtroom, I realized some wounds never close. They only sleep until the knock of the past shatters them all over again. I first met Caleb when I was 15. He was my brother's best friend, a second-year law student, handsome, articulate, someone my mother openly saw as the perfect future son-in-law, even though he barely looked at me. I was just the little sister who liked to read and hid away sketching in my room. No one noticed how Caleb's eyes lingered on me longer than they should, or how he brushed against my shoulder in the kitchen when there was no reason to. I told myself I was imagining it. When I turned 16, my mother hosted a small birthday party at home. Caleb came, carrying an expensive bottle of wine and offering polite congratulations. That night, after most of the guests had gone, my mother went upstairs to bed, and I stayed behind in the kitchen to clean up. He was the last one left. He said, "Let me help." And I smiled faintly, not suspecting a thing. I don't need to describe the details, you can imagine. That kitchen, where I had learned to cook my first dish, where my brother and I used to laugh while tossing flour on weekends, became a prison. When I fought, begged, he only held me tighter and whispered words that froze me to the core. Afterward, I ran upstairs, locked my door, and curled up on the floor, unable to cry out loud. My body hurt, but my mind was worse. I felt as if I had done something wrong. The next morning, I gathered what little courage I had to tell my mother. I thought she would hold me, call the police, protect me the way every mother should. Instead, she stared at me and sighed. "Quinn, you need to understand. Caleb isn't that kind of person," she said. My throat closed up. "You don't believe me." She was quiet, then stood to make tea, her tone flat, like discussing the weather. "I think you're confused. Teenage girls misinterpret feelings." I stood frozen. "What did you just say?" "Caleb is a good man. Do you realize what kind of reputation his family has? I don't want to hear any more nonsense. And if you say such things outside, I will never forgive you." I left that house that day. I went to Daniel's home. He was my boyfriend then, the only one who didn't doubt me, who didn't ask, "Are you sure?" Who didn't tell me to stay quiet. Daniel's mother opened the door, saw my pale face and small backpack, and simply asked, "Are you hungry?" That was when I finally cried, the first time in days. Daniel's family wasn't wealthy. They weren't well known. But they had faith. Throughout the case against Caleb, they stood by me. They hired a lawyer, drove me to every hearing, sat silently holding my hand when Caleb kept delaying instead of admitting what he had done. After nearly a year of tension, he finally pleaded guilty and struck a deal with the prosecutor for a reduced sentence. No prison time, only probation, and a lifetime restraining order against him. I wanted to scream when I heard the verdict, to slam the table and shout that it wasn't enough, but I just smiled at my lawyer and said thank you. Because I knew if I stayed one more second in that room, I would lose my composure. That night, I went back to Daniel's house, lying in silence in the small basement room that I now called home. Daniel placed his hand on my shoulder and whispered, "No one has the right to steal your voice." I closed my eyes and breathed deep. I had chosen truth. I hadn't stayed silent. But my mother did. She chose Caleb. She chose silence. She chose appearances, her social standing, the family's image over her own daughter. In the years that followed, I rebuilt my life. I studied graphic design in college, got a stable job, married Daniel, had children. I never wrote my mother. She didn't come to my wedding. When Ava was born, I didn't tell her. I thought she had chosen to stay out of my life forever. But I was wrong. She was only waiting for the right moment to return. With Caleb, with papers in hand, with that chilling, "Emma is not Quinn's daughter." And now I'm facing the old nightmare in a new disguise. In front of a court, in front of my husband, trying to understand why the man who destroyed me is now allowed to walk back into our lives as if nothing had happened. I don't know what brought Caleb back after all these years. But I know one thing. He didn't come back just to see my daughter. I met Daniel in the darkest days of my life. He never asked me questions I couldn't answer, never forced me to retell what had happened. He just stayed, patient, as if he understood without words. In those first years living with his family, I studied while working part-time at a small bookstore near campus. Daniel majored in information technology, and we took turns cooking dinner with whatever we could buy from the discount section at the grocery store. After graduation, we moved to a small town in Oregon where neighbors still greeted each other every morning, where kids rode their bikes to school without fear. Daniel got a stable job in a software company's IT department, and I worked as a designer for a local print shop. We married in a little wooden church on a hillside, no flowers, no lavish dress, just a quiet vow and the firm grip of the man I loved. When Ava was born, I cried when I heard her cry in the delivery room. Not from pain, but because something inside me finally felt healed. She looked just like Daniel, from her bright eyes to her light brown hair, but when her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, I felt as though I had been reborn. 4 years later, we welcomed Noah, a noisy, cheerful boy who loved dragging the neighbor's cat home, begging to keep it as his brother. The house we rented sat in a peaceful neighborhood. White picket fence, lavender in the front yard, neighbors leaving pumpkins at the door every fall. Ava went to the elementary school 3 blocks away, where teachers called her the helper because she never let anyone play alone. Noah had just started kindergarten, and every morning I lingered a bit to watch him do the rooster dance with a friend before class. I thought I had locked the past behind a door. Sometimes, on birthdays or Christmas, my mother would call, her tone soft, asking about my health, mentioning she had new glasses, that she had quit working at the publishing house. Occasionally, she'd ask, "Can I have a picture of Ava?" I stayed silent, changing the subject. She always avoided mentioning Caleb, as if nothing had ever happened. One year, she mailed me a blue scarf. I almost threw it out, but instead, I folded it away at the bottom of a drawer. I didn't know what I felt, pity, anger, but I knew I wasn't ready to forgive. Every time I thought of how she covered up his crime, I remembered Ava's frightened eyes, and I knew I couldn't let her near my children. Daniel never pushed me to reconnect. He understood there was always a hollow place inside me, but he never tried to fill it. We poured ourselves into building a healthy family, where our kids wouldn't have to grow up learning to live with fear. I taught Ava how to recognize who could be trusted. Daniel taught Noah how to build model spaceships out of popsicle sticks and tape. We thought if we gave them enough love, everything would be all right. Until the court summons came. It was a Tuesday morning, the sky gray, and I was packing Ava's lunch. Noah was playing with Legos on the floor, and Daniel was pouring coffee into his thermos. A knock on the door. I thought it was a neighbor returning a toy, but it was a man in uniform, handing me an envelope. I signed, closed the door, and before I even undid the string, my heart was pounding like a drum. I opened it with shaking hands, and when I saw Caleb's name, I collapsed into a chair. Daniel came over, gently tugged the paper from my hand, skimmed it. "He's suing us?" His brow furrowed. "For custody of Ava?" I couldn't speak. My eyes glued to my mother's name printed just below the signature. Margaret L. Spencer, co-petitioner with Caleb. My hands went cold. Ava bounded down the stairs, asking, "Mom, can I add an apple to my lunchbox?" I didn't even lift my head, just nodded. Daniel took Ava to school. I stayed frozen. The world I had built every afternoon reading with my kids, Daniel's jacket hanging on his chair, suddenly felt fragile as glass. Caleb hadn't just returned. He had dragged my mother with him. And his target wasn't only Ava. I don't remember how long I sat in that kitchen, only that the light from the window dimmed as clouds thickened in the sky. The words from the summons burned in my mind, every sentence like a cruel joke planned long in advance. Caleb accused me of obstructing the father-daughter bond, presenting a DNA report he claimed came from an independent private lab. My mother signed in support, even adding a handwritten note to the judge. My daughter has a history of emotional instability, having run away from home as a minor. I fear she is unfit to raise a developing child. I read those words over and over, unable to believe my mother had written them. When Daniel returned from dropping Ava off, he came into the house tense, set down his bag, and sat across from me. "How are you going to explain this to Ava?" he asked quietly. "Not yet," I said, staring at the papers. "I need to understand exactly what he's after. Why now?" Daniel nodded, gripping my hand. "I'll call a lawyer." That night, after Noah was asleep, I sat beside Ava's bed, brushing her hair back as she asked, "Why do you look so sad, Mom?" I hesitated, then said, "Someone is trying to interfere with our family, but Dad and I won't let it happen." She looked at me suspiciously. "Who is it?" I smiled softly, not ready to burden her. "Just someone I don't trust. You don't need to worry." A few days later, we met with a family lawyer, a woman in her 50s named Elise Chambers, who had represented many complicated custody cases. Elise read through the file, then looked up after a long pause. "The issue," she said, "is that even with Caleb's record, the agreement back then doesn't bar him from filing again if he claims to have new evidence. This DNA report, though falsified, forces the court to investigate further before making a ruling." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "New evidence. He doesn't have any rights." He gave that up. "Legally, that's one thing, but media and public opinion can be steered very easily," Elise said, sliding the stack of documents toward us. "What worries me is that your mother is also a petitioner. She's immediate family. The court could interpret this as an attempt at reconnection, not conspiracy." I stayed silent, my chest heavy as stone. Elise's voice softened. "We'll need to fight this aggressively. Pick apart every flaw in Caleb's file, prove the test is fake, reaffirm the old agreement. And most importantly, show that Ava is happy, safe, and doesn't need anyone else involved." "Do you think my mother is doing this because she actually believes Caleb?" I asked, though deep down I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Elise studied me for a long time before speaking. "I don't know her motive. But when a mother chooses to write to the court that her daughter is unstable, instead of picking up the phone to ask how she's doing, her goal likely isn't her child's well-being anymore." The next day, I drove Ava to school, watching her walk into class with her pink backpack, my heart tightening painfully. On the way home, I stopped at a small coffee shop at the end of the block, ordered a latte, and never took a sip. Part of me still wanted to believe my mother was deceived by Caleb, that she didn't understand the full truth. But deep inside, I knew she did. She had understood since the day I knelt at her feet, crying and begging her to believe me, and she still chose silence. I called Claire my sister, who still lived in another state, someone I hadn't seen in years. When I told her everything, she stayed quiet for a long time. "Are you sure Mom isn't being forced?" Claire finally asked, her voice clinging to some fragile hope. "Her name is signed clearly, by hand, not drafted by a lawyer," I replied. And she added extra notes in her own writing. "Do you think that looks forced?" Claire sighed. "He's got money, connections. Is it possible Mom owes him something?" I didn't know. My mother had kept her distance from me for years, but she still showed up at community gatherings, still went to church every week. Caleb had been a familiar face in that church too. Maybe they never stopped seeing each other. Maybe they never truly cut ties. I didn't have time to guess anymore. Elise suggested we take Ava for a psychological evaluation by a neutral expert appointed by the court. It would prove she hadn't been harmed in any way, as Caleb and my mother alleged. I sat outside the office while my daughter spent nearly an hour inside with the evaluator, my nerves on fire. When Ava came out, she was beaming, saying the lady had asked what subjects she liked at school and whether she dreamed about superheroes. When Elise received the preliminary report, she nodded with satisfaction. Ava is healthy, emotionally stable, and deeply bonded with her current parents. That's a strong advantage. But Caleb didn't stop with the petition. He began showing up around the neighborhood, standing at a distance from the school or in public places. He never approached directly, but always positioned himself within sight. Every time I spotted his figure, white shirt, glasses, that half smile, my chest clenched like it was being crushed. Elijah, the neighbor across the street, told me a stranger had been taking pictures in front of my house for days. I called the police, but since he hadn't broken any specific law, they only filed a report and advised me to install more security cameras. Standing in my bedroom, looking out the window at the lawn, phone gripped tightly in my hand, I had never felt my world so fragile. And what chilled me most was Ava's eyes when she asked, "Mom, is someone looking for me?" I never thought I would feel watched again, that same suffocating sensation that haunted me through my teenage years. Yet here it was, creeping back into the very home I had built, beside the two children and the husband who always protected me. It started quietly. One afternoon when Ava came home from school, she handed me a small pink-wrapped package with a bow and her name written in italics, "For Ava, because you deserve it." I thought it was from a classmate, so I just smiled. But inside was a silver necklace with a heart pendant engraved Emma. No one at school called her Emma. That was the name I had almost given Ava before changing it, something only Daniel and I knew, something I had never shared with anyone. I looked at Daniel. He understood instantly. He squeezed my shoulder and said, "We'll get to the bottom of this." A few days later, another package arrived, a storybook about fathers separated from daughters, searching to reunite. No return address, only a handwritten note in black ink. "Little one, every princess deserves to know her father." I started checking the mailbox daily, always before Ava or Noah could touch it. Then came something worse. On Ava's phone, I discovered a chat app installed without my knowledge. I asked her. "Bella showed me. I was talking with my friend Mia on there," Ava said, handing me the screen. The profile picture showed a smiling blonde girl. I scrolled. Mia had asked Ava all sorts of things. "Are you happy? Does your mom get angry a lot? Do you ever wish you knew more about your family?" I clenched the phone. Nothing explicit, no crude words, but every message carefully crafted to stir doubt, to manipulate my daughter's innocence. I locked down every safety setting, disabled the account, reported the app. At the same time, Daniel reset all our Wi-Fi passwords, reconfigured the network, and bought additional family security software. But what suffocated me wasn't technology. It was that Caleb was reaching my daughter not with threats, but with persistence, the kind of persistence born from a plan laid long ago. I called Elise and explained everything. We need evidence of the real identity behind that account, she said. The court won't recognize it just on instinct. So I have to wait until he sends her photo to half the town. I snapped bitterly, almost in tears. Elise, he knows the old name I almost gave Ava. Only one other person ever knew, and she's now signing petitions with Caleb. She paused. We'll hire a cybersecurity expert to trace it. I hung up, sweat chilling my neck. I had never felt so cornered. Then something happened with Noah. That morning his teacher called, panic in her voice. We just found Noah locked in the boys' restroom at the end of the hall. He was trembling, saying someone whispered to him in the dark. I rushed to the school. Noah hadn't spoken to anyone. I knelt down, holding him tight, whispering in his ear, "What happened, sweetheart?" His wide eyes, swollen from crying, looked at me as he whispered. Someone turned off the light. Then a voice right next to me said, "Your mom is lying. Your dad is someone else." I almost stopped breathing. Daniel drove us home, gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. I sat in the back seat holding Noah, my mind spinning. Someone had slipped into the school, waited for a break, trapped my 6-year-old in a dark room and whispered poison into his ears. At home, I locked myself in the bathroom and stared into the mirror. The reflection staring back was of a failing mother. I had sworn to protect my children from every wound I once endured, and now they were living in a cycle of fear and manipulation. Daniel tapped on the door softly. "Are you all right?" I opened it, leaning into his chest. "We have to go further. He isn't alone. He has my mother, money, information, and now he's worming his way into our children's minds." Daniel nodded firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." That night, I went into Ava's room, sitting on the edge of her bed as she folded her crafts. I studied her, wondering how many of her young thoughts were being stretched by a stranger's words. "I need you to listen carefully," I said gently. "Not everyone who gives gifts is good. Some people use them to earn trust, then make you believe things that aren't true." Ava looked at me. "You think someone's tricking me?" I didn't want her to feel ashamed or scared. I stroked her hair and whispered, "I don't blame you, but I want you to remember if anyone who isn't me or Dad asks you personal questions, you tell us right away. We're a team, okay?" She nodded and hugged me tight. I kissed her forehead, vowing that tomorrow I would not let anyone slip into this family again. And if Caleb wanted to fight in the shadows, I would drag him into the light. I never thought I'd have to hear Caleb stand in a courtroom, speaking casually about redemption and repentance. He wore a light gray suit, pale blue tie, hair neatly slicked back. He looked around the room like a calm man trying to reclaim something sacred. But when I looked at him, I saw only the predator who had once pushed me into the dark and walked away without regret. The pastor called as his witness had a gentle face, glasses perched on his nose, his voice as soft as a Sunday morning radio. He stood at the podium, hand on a Bible, and began. "Caleb is one of our model parishioners," he said. "He volunteers with youth, runs community outreach, and is often the first to stay behind and clean after services." I sat frozen. I had hoped the church at least wouldn't shield him behind polished words. But here, under the glow of law and blind faith, he was rewriting himself with precision. "He has confided in me about past mistakes," the pastor went on, "and I believe no one is beyond change. Everyone deserves the chance to make amends and be loved." Daniel squeezed my hand tightly under the table, his pulse burning hot against my skin. Then came my mother's turn. She stepped up, eyes red, beige silk scarf trembling in her hands. I had seen her like that before, at grand events when my father was alive. She had a gift for making people believe she was shattered, when all she truly cared about was her reputation. "I am Quinn's mother," she began, her voice choked. "I love my daughter, but she's changed. She's pushed me out of her life for 10 years. I looked at her, no longer angry, only estranged. That woman standing there was no longer my mother. I was wrong not to believe her back then, she continued, but my daughter never gave me the chance to make it right. She nurtured her resentment and barred my granddaughter Ava from knowing her real father. That's not protection. That's vengeance. The courtroom fell silent. Elise rose as soon as my mother left the stand. Your Honor, I request a closed hearing for my client's rebuttal testimony. The sensitive nature of personal history makes it inappropriate to disclose in public at this time. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and stern eyes, nodded. Request granted. The next session will be in closed chambers. The legal battle had officially entered a prolonged stage. The prosecutor asked for more time to verify the authenticity of Caleb's DNA report and also ordered prosecutors and a review of the legality of the materials linked to the gifts sent to Ava. We left the courthouse in silence. The press wasn't there yet, but I knew it wouldn't be long before everything spilled into the open, no matter which way it turned. Daniel held my hand as we walked into the parking lot, a place I had once thought of as a safe pause. Now everywhere felt like a battlefield. You don't have to speak if you're not ready, he said quietly. But if you want to, I'll sit beside you, all the way through. I turned to him, my voice hoarse. I won't let him rewrite my life with someone else's words. That night, after putting Ava and Noah to bed, I opened my laptop and began drafting my statement. Elise had told me I had the right to choose to testify directly or provide a sworn personal account. I chose to write, not out of fear of facing him, but because I wanted every word deliberate, every thought placed carefully, unclouded by raw emotion. I wrote about that night in the kitchen when I was 16, about how Caleb left with a casual smile, as if nothing had happened, leaving me in a corner with a shame I had no name for. I wrote about the months I lived with Daniel and his family, simple but safe meals, nights spent awake from nightmares, and the first fragile moments I began to believe life could continue. I didn't write with hatred. I wrote the truth, with the hope that justice doesn't need to shout, but it must be heard with a heart unswayed by pretty words. 3 days later, Elise filed a motion to dismiss the DNA test, accompanied by an independent expert's report showing data tampering. Elise told me, if we keep Ava with you, it won't be because we painted Caleb as a monster. It will be because we proved you are the mother she needs. I left her office with those words echoing in my mind. I didn't need to expose him to the whole world. I just needed to hold on to what was mine. Ava wasn't a prize. She was a soul who had taught me how to love again, and I wouldn't let anyone, not even the woman who gave me life, take her away with counterfeit tears. I never thought I'd see the day I would hire a private investigator. But everything around Caleb was no longer just a family case. Every sign pointed to something larger, a scheme, carefully crafted, calculated, dangerous. Elise was the first to suggest it. We need to know what he's doing outside the courtroom, not just inside, she said when I handed her my signed statement. If there's anything beyond the legal front, if he's manipulating the situation through unofficial means, we have to find it first. The man she referred me to was named Richard Hale. In his 40s, tall, plainly dressed, measured in speech. When I met him at a small cafe downtown, he studied me for a long moment before saying, "You were right to act first. Men like Caleb don't just use the law. They know how to create cracks to slip through." I handed him the case files, photos of the gifts, screenshots of the fake accounts, and my mother's name, Margaret, co-signed on the petition. Richard nodded, jotting in his notebook. I'll start with his online trail. He's left more behind than he thinks. A week later, he called me back. The meeting wasn't in a cafe, but in his small office on the second floor of an old building. The room smelled faintly of old paper. He pushed a laptop toward me. The network he's part of, he didn't create it, but he's very active, Richard said. On the screen was a private forum, invitation only. Its name, Fathers Without Voice. It sounded harmless, even sympathetic, but the content made my throat tighten. Topics like how to reconnect with kids despite restraining orders, legal strategies to reverse custody, and worse, Shadowy exchanges between men, once accused men who had dodged heavy sentences, sharing how to hide behavior, blur. Records, whitewash their past before a judge. Caleb used an alias, but all evidence. IP address, login history, even timestamps lining up with his legal filings pointed straight to him. And this. Richard clicked a few commands, pulling up a screenshot of an email. That address links to a lab, he explained. You remember the DNA test he filed? I nodded, nausea rising. The signature belongs to a nurse, Kara Mendel. She works at a private hospital north of the city. 3 years ago, she was investigated internally for falsifying medical records in a divorce case. Richard looked at me, and she's in that group. I lost my composure. They colluded, not just him, but a whole network. Richard nodded. She verified the sample, but the actual child tested wasn't Ava. And it wasn't you. It was another child, likely from someone in that group. Because the paperwork was altered, the court hasn't caught it yet. I leaned back in my chair. Daniel sat beside me, frozen. I gripped his hand. He's using this to force me into compromise. Richard pulled out an envelope, slid it across the table. Inside were printed emails Caleb had sent another longtime member of the group. In them, he wrote, I don't need real custody, just her compliance, a nod, 1 photo a year, 1 private meeting. If not, I'll show her what hell looks like. Daniel lifted his head, voice tight. He's trying to break you through public opinion, Richard continued. He's been in contact with a journalist, one who writes about controversial fathers' rights cases. I found their correspondence. The article isn't out yet, but I'm certain he plans to release it if you don't back down. I looked at Richard, throat dry. What do I do? We'll file this with Elise, he said. But you need to brace for backlash. Public opinion can be exploited, but justice requires endurance. That night, I sat in my office, rereading every line of those emails. It felt like staring into a termite colony from the inside, ready to crumble with the slightest touch. I opened an old photo box, pulling out the first picture of Ava on her 2nd birthday. She wore a pink dress, face smeared with frosting, laughing in Daniel's arms. That photo reminded me of one thing I could never forget. She didn't need 2 fathers. She needed one mother who would stand firm when darkness closed in. And if Caleb thought I'd collapse under articles or slander, he'd forgotten I had survived one horrific night and kept living. I looked at Daniel, asleep at the desk, still in his work shirt. I brushed his hair gently and whispered, We won't let him take anything else. Not our honor, not our children, not our lives. I don't know what made me call Claire the next morning. Maybe a restless dream, maybe some instinct, like a frayed string snapping in the night. I hadn't spoken to her in years. Not because of open conflict, but because a distance had always sat between us, invisible, but sharp enough to ache. I remembered Claire teaching me how to tie my shoes, braid my hair, hide my diary under the mattress. But when I accused Caleb, when Mom turned away, Claire stepped back too. No defense, no questions, just absence. She missed my wedding. When Ava was born, she sent a single text. Congratulations. I hope she's nothing like you. I thought I'd grown used to the silence. But after uncovering Caleb's network, his threats, his dirty tactics, I suddenly remembered a photo used in the anonymous draft article he planned to leak. Ava on Daniel's lap at the park, me behind them holding coffee. A Sunday, just us. The angle was too close to have been taken from afar, and the only other person I knew who had been at the park that day briefly was Claire. I called her. Her voice was, as I remembered, rough, detached, deliberate. I didn't waste time. That photo. You sent it to Caleb, didn't you? Silence, then a sigh. That's why you called. And the others. At Ava's school meeting, at Noah's playground, at the ice cream shop. How long have you been following us? Claire didn't answer right away, then softly, not following, just asked. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. Asked by who? Mom? Or Caleb? Both, she admitted, more bluntly than I expected. Mom said if I helped them, I'd inherit everything left, the Vermont house, the shares Dad left behind. I leaned back, chest hollow. You sold me out. For money. Don't say it like you don't know what my life's been. Claire snapped, her voice sharpening. You have a family, a husband, kids, a whole safe life. And me. Mom never believed I could succeed. It was always Quinn is smart, Quinn is strong, Quinn is different. You think I didn't notice? I closed my eyes. You're justifying betraying me. I'm saying you're not the only one Mom ever hurt. Her words stunned me into silence. Claire, I whispered. I didn't choose to be a victim. I didn't choose to have Caleb shadow my life. But you did choose, and you chose him. She didn't reply. Only wind hummed through the line. I thought she had hung up until I heard her whisper. Mom believes Caleb, no matter what he did. She thinks you made it up, and if you don't give him Ava, she said she'll make the court see you as unstable. My throat tightened. You know what I went through. I went through it too. Alone. No, Daniel. No in-laws to love me. You always had someone choosing you. I didn't. This time, Mom chose me. I couldn't speak another word. I hung up. Daniel stood in the kitchen with a glass of water. Seeing my face pale, he stepped forward. Claire? He asked. I nodded, sinking into a chair. She's been watching us, taking pictures, sending them, because Mom promised her money. Disgust crossed Daniel's face. Your own sister could really go that far? I didn't answer. In my head, all I saw were the times Claire had stood beside Mom, coaxing me to return to family gatherings, Christmases I didn't want. I had thought she wanted reconciliation. Turns out, it was for the will. That night, I lay beside Daniel, unable to sleep. I stared at the ceiling, remembering nights as a child, when I'd crawl into Claire's bed after nightmares. She'd let me stay, telling me fairy tales in her warm, low voice, reminding me, Quinn, don't tell anyone about your sleepwalking. Some things are better kept secret. I used to believe we had a secret language. Maybe it had died long ago. The next morning, Elise called, her voice calm, as if she knew I was unraveling. Quinn, I need you focused. They're about to release the article. There's a blogger's name, part of a father's rights group. I knew it, I said. They're staging it, and there's testimony coming, Elise added. From a family member, your sister. I closed my eyes, my heartbeat slowing painfully. Elise continued. We'll prepare a legal rebuttal and file a motion noting a conflict of interest from a family member interfering with evidence. I asked, is there any way to prove that Claire was promised the inheritance by Mom? Elise answered, if you can get a message or an email, yes. I opened my phone and scrolled back through my conversation with Claire. Earlier, she had sent me a screenshot of an email from Mom. If you help me with this, you won't lose. Everything will be yours. The house, the shares, everything your father left behind. I forwarded that image straight to Elise. When the screen showed sent, I lifted my head and exhaled deeply. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss, but it was necessary. I knew I had just lost a sister, or at least the version of her I had once held on to. But I had also shielded my daughter from yet another web, one more insidious, more intimate, and more ruthless than any stranger could ever be. On the morning of the next hearing, rain fell early. Droplets tapped against the windshield like a slow, heavy countdown. I sat behind the wheel, hands gripping tight. Daniel sat beside me, silent, glancing at me as if to ask, are you ready? I didn't nod or shake my head. I just stared straight ahead, where the courthouse loomed under the gray sky. Elise had called me the day before. Her voice carried both excitement and caution. We have direct evidence, she said, but don't expect him to back down. Caleb will fight. Men like him don't accept defeat. I knew that, but I wasn't walking into court to defend. I was walking in to stand tall. Inside the courtroom, things moved faster than I expected. Elise began by requesting the projection of a security video recorded by Richard, the private investigator, in a hospital parking lot. The curtains were drawn, the room dimmed, and the footage began. On screen, Caleb appeared in a baseball cap and dark glasses. He approached a tall, thin woman in a white lab coat. They exchanged words, then he handed her a pale yellow envelope. She glanced around quickly, then tucked it into her pocket. The meeting lasted less than 2 minutes, but both faces were unmistakably clear. Kara Mendel, Elise said, pointing to the screen. A medical employee previously investigated for tampering with test results during a divorce case in 2019. She is the one who signed off on the DNA report submitted by Mr. Caleb. The other side erupted. Caleb's lawyer leapt to object, arguing the footage was inadmissible due to improper collection. But Elise was ready. The camera was installed by a licensed private investigator in a public area. There was no invasion of privacy. The court has full authority to admit this. The judge nodded. A simple motion, yet it felt as though the whole room tilted with it. Elise wasn't done. She requested a new witness be called. I turned to look. A middle-aged woman stepped forward, small frame, plain white blouse, no makeup, but eyes so resolute they made my skin prickle. "My name is Melissa Grant," she said, her voice steady. "I had a past relationship with Mr. Caleb. When I was 21, he was my internship supervisor at a summer job." Elise asked, "Did you ever file a complaint against him?" Melissa nodded. "In 2011, but the case was closed for lack of evidence. I had no lawyer, no one on my side. I wasn't the daughter of a mayor or related to anyone on the city council." I looked at Caleb. His face stayed calm, but his hand had begun tapping rhythmically on his knee. That rhythm, I remembered it well, was how he steadied himself before striking back. Melissa continued, her voice catching. "I didn't plan to speak up. I've built a new life. I have a family, young children. But when I heard Quinn's story, I realized if I stayed silent, he would keep repeating the same pattern with others." She became the voice I couldn't be back then. Elise looked at me. I gave a small nod. Inside me swelled a tangle of gratitude, sorrow, and resolve. The judge called a recess to review the new evidence and testimony. As people rose, Elise added, not through the microphone, but loud enough to carry in the hushed chamber. "We request a formal investigation into document forgery and violation of the no-contact order previously issued. The evidence presented is sufficient to open a new criminal case." No one spoke for several seconds. Then the judge, her voice raspy yet firm, declared, "The request is granted. An investigation will be initiated today. Furthermore, I order an immediate suspension of all civil proceedings regarding custody until the criminal matter is resolved. During this time, Mr. Caleb is forbidden from any direct or indirect contact with Mrs. Quinn's family under any circumstance." I hadn't expected my body to tremble like that. Not from fear, from relief. It wasn't the end, but at least it was a pause to breathe. Outside, the rain had eased. The sky was still heavy, but no longer pressing down as it had that morning. I stood on the courthouse steps, staring at the shimmering puddles. Daniel came close, resting his hand on my back. "You did it," he whispered. I turned to him, the man who had quietly protected me for over a decade, the only father Ava and Noah had ever known. "No," I said. "We did." Across the courtyard, I saw Melissa standing alone with a paper cup of coffee. I walked over. She looked up as I approached. "Thank you," I said. "Not for the testimony. For your courage." Melissa smiled, weary around the eyes. "I only wish back then I'd had someone like you to step up. Maybe I wouldn't have lost so many years of sleep." I squeezed her hand gently. We weren't broken women. We were survivors. And today, we stood no longer alone. That night, the air was still. Cold seeped in through cracks in the windows and past the heavy curtains. I sat in my office, staring at the glow of the computer screen, mind blank. Daniel and the kids were asleep. The house was wrapped in silence, the kind that felt both comforting and uneasy. The faint drip from the coffee machine was the only sound left. I was about to switch off the lights when my phone lit up. A security alert. Unusual motion at the back door. I froze. 2 seconds later, a faint beep beep sounded from the control panel, then stopped. I ran into the living room, grabbing the baseball bat by the shoe cabinet out of reflex. The hall light flicked on. The back door stood slightly ajar. The hinges creaked. Footsteps light, deliberate, crossed the wooden floor. Someone was inside. I bolted upstairs, one thought burning in my mind. Ava. I had to reach her. First, I rushed into her room. She slept soundly, clutching her teddy bear, blanket half off. I dropped to my knees, pulled her close, listening. The footsteps climbed the stairs. Daniel. I hissed, shaking her lightly, barely above a whisper. Wake up. Someone's in the house. Ava blinked awake, groggy, confused. Then the alarm shrieked. The siren ripped through the night. Motion lights blazed white down the hallway. I heard the front door slam, then Daniel's voice shouting, "Call the police. Someone's inside." I pulled Ava up, clutching her tight, retreating into the corner. The bedroom door burst open, and there he was, Caleb, his shadow stretching long across the floor, eyes wide, breath ragged like a trapped animal. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he hissed. "I just want to take her. She's my daughter." I didn't answer. I held Ava tighter, feeling her body tremble. "I have proof," Caleb growled. "I have rights." "No," I said, eyes locked on his. "You have a restraining order. You have a record of crimes. And now you've broken the law again." Outside, red and blue lights began flashing across the windows. Sirens echoed through the neighborhood. Porch lights snapped on. Shouts rang out. Caleb glanced back, cornered. He bolted down the stairs. I carried Ava out of the room. Daniel was already downstairs, gripping the bat. "The police are here," he shouted. Orders barked from the porch. Neighbors gathered in robes, phones in hand. The door flew open. 2 officers stormed in. Caleb hit the floor, face pressed to the tiles, wrists locked behind his back. Ava buried her face in my shoulder, gasping, then sobbing. One officer approached me. "We caught him trying to climb the back fence. He's not going anywhere, Mrs. Quinn." I couldn't speak. I only nodded, holding Ava tighter, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Daniel came close, wrapping his arms around us both. "It's over," he whispered. "You're safe. She's safe." I looked around. The flashing lights danced on the rain-slick ground. Neighbors whispered, some staring at me with shock, others with curiosity. None of it mattered. The only thing real was Ava's small arms clinging fiercely around my neck, as if she had felt the terror I had just lived through. A medic came to check us over. We were unharmed. The police asked for my statement. As they let him out, Caleb turned his head, shouting, "You'll pay for tearing me from my daughter." I looked straight into his eyes. No fear left, no anger either. Only emptiness, as if the final door between me and the past had finally closed. "I didn't tear anyone apart," I replied calmly. "You erased yourself from her life. And you can't run anymore." The final hearing was held in the largest courtroom in King County. I sat quietly in the front row, clutching a deep blue silk scarf, Ava's birthday gift to me back in March. Next to me, Daniel held my hand, his eyes fixed on the jury. Ava and Noah were kept out of the courtroom for psychological reasons. We didn't want them to witness any more pain. At the defendant's stand, Caleb kept his head down, pale, hair disheveled, his old suit looking out of place among everyone else in the room. But what silenced the chamber was when the prosecutor played the video of Caleb handing the envelope to the nurse, clear proof of his lies and his scheme to falsify DNA records. Next came the testimony of Jenna L., a former victim who had once fled the state to escape his abuse. Now returning because she believed, Quinn stood up for those who no longer had a voice. The gavel struck after nearly 40 minutes of deliberation. The defendant, Caleb Porter, is sentenced to 18 years in prison, with no parole for 12 years. He will also face further investigation for threats, violating the restraining order, falsifying documents, and suspected connections to fugitive groups. I didn't cry, I simply closed my eyes for a long moment and exhaled deeply, as if pushing every shadow out of my chest. But it wasn't over. After Caleb's sentencing, the prosecutor moved forward with charges against my mother, Jeanette. Evidence showed she and Claire had helped Caleb gather personal photos of me, secretly sending them to online groups to smear my reputation, and had lied in the custody petition for Ava. It was enough to charge her with conspiracy and deliberate falsification of legal procedures. She sat one row behind me, holding her familiar Louis Vuitton handbag. Her face showed no change, but I saw her eyes flinch. Claire, however, wasn't present. After being exposed for illegally altering our father's estate records to seize inheritance, she had been stripped of all rights. According to the family lawyer, Claire had left Washington for Nevada and gave no contact address. I didn't feel relief at their punishment. I didn't feel joy. But I did feel that a necessary order had been restored. Not revenge, just proof that silence is not justice, and blind loyalty cannot replace truth. In the weeks that followed, I spent nearly all my time with Ava. She began therapy with Dr. Evelyn Harper, a child psychologist who had worked with young victims in major cases in Oregon. Ava drew constantly. One day, she handed me a picture with crooked but heartfelt words, "Mommy is home, no one will take me away again." I kept that drawing, laminated it, and framed it on the living room shelf. Every day after work, I looked at it to remind myself, some battles aren't only to protect, but to heal. Not just for my daughter, for myself too. Daniel never once blamed me for hiding Caleb's return. Instead, he handled every detail, changing security codes, installing more sensor lights in the yard, and rearranging his schedule to drive Ava to school so I had time to recover from the months of trials. Noah stayed carefree, but I noticed him hugging Ava a little tighter at night. They shared a room, whispered stories, giggled together, and sometimes Ava would run into my arms and whisper, "Thank you, Mommy, for not letting me go with him." One September morning, as I sat at my desk drafting a communication plan for a new project, I stopped, stared at the blank screen, and opened a brand new file. I named it the Last Light Foundation. It became the nonprofit I launched with legal support from Helen, the lawyer who had helped me in Caleb's case. The foundation focused on 3 goals: legal aid for single mothers facing emotional or physical abuse, funding therapy for children in violent households, and building a safe online platform for victims to report without fear of being tracked. At the launch press conference, I wore a teal dress, Ava's favorite color, and stood on a small stage before nearly 100 attendees. Behind me on the screen was Ava's drawing with the words she once scribbled. When asked why I chose the name The Last Light, I answered, because for many people, the battle ends when no one is left standing beside them. But the last light is where they still see they are loved. Family isn't blood. It's the people who choose to protect you when no one else will. In the audience, some wiped tears. I saw Helen nod. Daniel held our 2 children, his eyes shining. As I stepped down, Ava ran to hug me, grinning wide. "Mommy, you spoke even better than my teacher." I laughed, kissed her cheek, and thought to myself, this laughter is the sound I want to keep. Not alarms in the night, not threats in a courtroom. But my little girl's laughter, knowing she is safe and will always be loved, always chosen. What do you think about what happened in my story? About Claire, about my mother, and about Caleb, those who once shared my blood but chose the opposite side, forcing me to stand up to protect my daughter? Have you ever felt that family could be the very place where loneliness and pain cut deepest? I believe each of us carries unspoken fractures in our families, things left unsaid but always smoldering. Maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe you're walking through pain no one else can see. If any part of this story resonates with you, share your thoughts. Your courage to speak may give strength to someone quietly enduring. Because in the end, what I've learned is this: not everyone born with us will walk beside us to the end. True family are those who will protect, listen, and stand by you even when you're at your weakest. Thank you for staying with me until now. If you'd like to continue this journey, hearing more real stories of family of loss, choices, and rebirth, follow this channel. The stories to come will bring much to reflect on, and maybe you'll find yourself in them too.